Hi, and welcome to Drafting Compliance. I'm Kane, he's Tom, and last week we talked with Matt Fryer of Infoblox. Today, we're talking about supply chain risks. But before we get to that, I want to mention we're sitting in the same room here in Austin, Texas, and we're in front of a live audience in front of our first user conference ever, and we've got some beer.
We do.
What are we drinking today, Tom?
It looks like there's quite a bit of adoption happening in the crowd, too. So I'm excited about that because I'm hoping we get some reactions out of the crowd, maybe some input as well. Today, I'm drinking, I don't know what everybody else is drinking, but I'm drinking Austin Beer Works Fire Eagle American IPA.
Fire Eagle. Isn't that a song?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right, it sounds like a
But
song title
it could
to me.
be. Maybe you could write it.
It's dripping.
Yeah, that's a good sign. I do want to just mention this one hits. This is 7.3%.
Oh, goody.
So those who are drinking that get a good start tonight. I think the other options out there is like a Pilsner and a cider. So there's something for everybody. So everybody enjoy. I am going to crack this beer.
Yeah, we should definitely crack this. And all right. Now, I love that we have a smaller glass today, Tom. I usually can't fit mine in a glass, but I don't think I'll drink this much
This could be
anyway.
a Dixie cup, and you still wouldn't get through it.
Oh, come on now. I get through the top eighth of an inch at least. This has got an aroma, doesn't it? I can smell it from here.
Well, I'll be honest. For an IPA, it's got a lot of clarity, so that surprises me right off the bat.
I can see people through this. That's
yeah,
kind of amazing.
It almost looks like an American lager. So that's a surprise to me. Usually IPAs have a little bit more haze to it. So
it's getting a little bit of an orangish look too, especially out of here, right?
I would also guess this is probably the West Coast variety. Oh, that smells delicious, doesn't it? I mean, that immediately has some welcoming aroma, some hoppy aroma.
I don't know. This kind of smells to me like my teenage years, honestly.
Yeah. That's right. Well, I was always putting deodorant on in my teenage years, so I didn't have that problem.
Before Axe body spray was a thing.
Yeah. Man, I mean, this is promising. This has a lot of character just in the nose. I mean, I'm smelling citrus, a little bit of mango maybe.
I can get the mango out of there, actually. Yeah. Didn't we do a mango beer? And it was.
I think we did. I think terrible. You equally hated that one. So. So, is anybody else drinking this? Should we try it?
All right. Cheers to the audience. Let's see how this one goes.
Yeah.
Oh.
This is delicious for sure. This has the typical IPA bite to it, so you get a lot of coating of the tongue, a lot of like hops sticking there.
You know, this is not as bad as the other ones where you've said it coats my tongue. This is not, thankfully, like sticky on my tongue, which is nice.
It definitely does invite you for another drink, though, doesn't it?
It invites you for another drink. Although I always give these two tests on the show just to see how it goes. But
and it's
got
a
more
nice
like front
hang
of
to
tongue
it.
as opposed to back of tongue.
I agree
I'm not
with
getting
that.
a lot of like.
Yeah.
I do get the mango flavor and a bit of citrus on it, and also some kind of like baking spice or what are those grains of paradise.
I'm so proud right now. You've really tasted it. I mean, it's not just pure disgust. I mean, I think we can all recognize the evolution and the maturity that's happening here on stage. This is actually really good. Like, I'm impressed. I wasn't thinking that we were going to have this much quality in this beer. So, all right. Well, before I take off 7.3%, we should talk about.
Oh no, I think you should just do the whole thing, and then we'll do some FedRAMP questions. But today's topic today is FedRAMP, Tom. So for our audience here, what is supply chain risk under FedRAMP? And how does it vary from how CISOs normally think about supply chain risks?
Yeah, so with the Rev 5 release of FedRAMP, a whole new control family called supply chain risk came in to really the umbrella of FedRAMP in general. It's all about how you handle risk in your supply chain as it affects your FedRAMP boundary. But the second half of your question, how does it sort of change the thinking of CISOs? CISOs in general should be thinking about this anyway. So it shouldn't be a big surprise. Certainly if we look at the history starting with maybe Target in 2013, SolarWinds, read your headlines today. Supply chain risk is a real risk, and it should be things that CISOs are thinking about pretty regularly, and I guarantee those that are in the room that have this responsibility, they are thinking about it. So this is really the federal government catching up to where CISOs are thinking anyway.
All right, and so then how does FedRAMP Moderate really address the challenges of supply chain risks for cloud service providers?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So in 2021, President Biden released in his executive order.
Yeah, the EO. Yeah.
14,017, I think. And if I got that right, I haven't had enough beer, but I'm pretty sure I got that right. So hand it over. So really with that, he mandated the fact that we have to, as a federal government, be more responsive to supply chain risk. We have to do a better job of assessing that risk and responding to that risk. FedRAMP Moderate is really taking on and building from that directive, and it's really saying what are the best practices in supply chain. Really starts with NIST. NIST released it first, but FedRAMP adopted it. So this is just the best practices around what we can do to mitigate our risk in supply chain.
All right, and so how do those, the FedRAMP approach vary in terms of best practices from what we've seen in the commercial sector? Is there anything differentiated or specific that makes it federal as opposed to just commercial?
Sure. The piece that makes it federal is the prescriptive nature of it, right? So we see that CISOs have largely put in vendor management programs, have largely started to adopt things like, hey, we've got to review a breach report, a breach stance, a DPA maybe. Perhaps they're collecting SOC 2, but those are sort of checkmark pieces of vendor management. What the federal government is mandating is you actually take a very proactive approach to assessing risk, and it has some pretty wild requirements that I think most organizations are not doing today. We'll talk about some of those in a bit.
All right, fantastic. And if you're enjoying this show on YouTube, please do ring the bell to get notifications about my quest to find an actually tolerable beer, or subscribe to us in your podcast app of choice to listen along and make this part of your monthly routine. So Tom, what specific controls are in place in FedRAMP Moderate to mitigate risks related to the software supply chain?
Yeah, there's quite a few. So the easy one to understand is you just have to have a program that pulls in all of the content associated with those vendors and assesses the risk. So whether it's data you collect personally or whether it's data that is publicly available, you have to be pulling those data sources in and assessing it for all your vendors. This especially applies to software where you are actually attaching to your boundary with somebody who's transferring data back and forth, right? So it, of course, also commingles into a bunch of controls you already have. So perhaps you have you should have, if you're in FedRAMP, a configuration management control, a vulnerability management control in place. This really marries in tightly with that, with those additional plans that you have in place, and helps you assess supply chain in terms of the holistic approach you're taking to assess risk in general in your program.
All right, and I also recently saw something about NIST putting out a hardware supply chain security risk management. It's not fully baked yet, but has that been incorporated yet into FedRAMP?
There's some really general ideas around that you have to. So the one that I really think enterprises are going to struggle with is you have to be able to detect tampering in hardware.
And I imagine like interdiction, for example, where somebody catches something while it's in transit and modifies the chipsets. Kind of like happened in,
That's right.
Wasn't it Forbes, it was Bloomberg, right? That thing about the tip the size of a pencil tip?
Yeah, it was actually, I have a picture of it somewhere. It was the size of a grain of rice that was put on chipboards, and that was a temporary. So you tell me how enterprises are going to detect that level of tampering. It's going to be a challenge, and it's going to require probably some services to spin up that help organizations comply with it. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it certainly is going to be a challenging one for cloud service providers, just given the volume of chips that they're purchasing as well as other hardware.
Well, and it's certainly a nod to some of our foreign competitors in terms of folks that are largely thought of as bad actors in that space. And I won't name any names here, but you guys can
China.
think of some of them. Yeah, rhymes with Mina, but yeah, I mean they're known to have put backdoors into hardware, and that's another thing you have to look for is vulnerabilities inside your hardware and your software for backdoors, things that are not supposed to be there, and you're supposed to be able to detect them. So again, most enterprises do not have that capability. That's really a red team capability that a lot of organizations just simply don't have.
All right, and I know that you said that FedRAMP is fairly prescriptive. So what are the required steps for vendors to report a supply chain related incident when we're operating under FedRAMP Moderate?
Well, obviously, we talked a little bit about how it integrates with other pieces of your security framework. Vulnerability management is a piece of that framework that is a part of continuous monitoring with FedRAMP. This marries directly into it. So if you find a vulnerability, you have to report it through that. You also have to put it on your POAM, so you're tracking and you're understanding the timeline for your risk mitigation associated with it. There isn't a special reporting mechanism associated with FedRAMP just for supply chain. They're expecting you to marry it into your existing ConMon. One other thing that's sort of interesting is the notification requirements around it also extend to your vendors. So you have to have specific agreements with all of your vendors to make sure they notify you if they have a vulnerability or a known threat within their own stack. So suddenly you've pushed out your program to another step that you haven't previously probably had built into your program.
And are there associated timelines? I know we've heard things like the SEC saying y'all need to get it within 4 days of materiality determination. We've heard other things about a 2-day determination notification window. Does FedRAMP go to that level of detail when there's an incident? And I suppose it's a two-part question. Is there a materiality component, or is it literally anything that happens?
No, there's definitely a materiality piece of it. So again, it's going to marry right back into your existing vulnerability management program. So if you find it and you consider it critical, you're going to have a much higher threshold that you have to hit than if you consider it a low, right? So I think 4 days is the critical level. I'd have to go back and refer to notes, but think of like a 4, 30, 90, 180 sort of timeline, depending on the severity of it. Again, you're going to have visibility all the way up to your agency in the federal government. So this is not something you're going to want to sit on.
Right, and now you just mentioned an interesting point there around agencies. So as a cloud service provider, how are agencies actually validating security stance of a cloud service provider's supply chain, not just them, but their entire supply chain under FedRAMP Moderate?
Yeah, I would say this is an area that's a little bit flux. So this is a brand new control family, and folks have not yet figured out how all of the bits and pieces of logistics are going to work out, but we can make some assumptions, right? We can assume that early on, as companies are going through maybe their latest annual assessment or their initial assessment, 3PAOs are going to spend way more time looking at this control family because it's new. So they're going to learn through that process as well. So they're going to start to create what is their list of best practices, and those folks do talk. So it will become ubiquitous through the 3PAO sort of ecosystem. So that's kind of the first piece of it. But you're also going to see annual assessments that say, are you doing what you say you did from a control perspective? You're going to report on your vendor list just like you do any other configuration list that you have. They're just another member of your configuration management database.
Okay, and that's going to probably also spin off a bunch of documentation. So what type of documentation is going to be required to prove compliance with supply chain risk management, given that it's so new under FedRAMP Moderate?
Yeah, documentation is really sort of the backbone of FedRAMP, right? So like any other control family, you're going to have a policy, you're going to have process. With this control family, you're going to have an actual plan, which has a little different connotation than process or procedure does underneath FedRAMP, so it's going to have more meat to it. But then underneath all that, you're going to have all of these controls that you've deemed that you're going to be performing on a continuous basis, right? You're going to have documentation that proves you're doing it. Just like any other control, but sometimes with third-party risk, you're dealing with other people's inputs. So you don't necessarily control the timeline as minutely as you do with your own environment. So you have to be careful to be on top of your vendors to provide you that same level. But again, underneath the FedRAMP Moderate umbrella, everybody in your authorization boundary should also be at that same level. So they should understand that requirement. Just like you have, they have it.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I think at this point we've hit that point in the show where we need to talk about our beers and evaluate how well. I can't help but notice, Tom, you have not drank nearly so much.
Well, it isn't because I haven't enjoyed it. It's been really good. I did have a second pour out of my glass.
You can have another pour out of mine as well.
I'm just going to finish.
I've pretty much got a whole one right here.
You know what? It's always fun to hear your take on it. So,
well, I always like to see how these things change over time after they've been exposed to air and had a chance to breathe a little bit to see if
that is a thing.
If the nose change. I'm getting banana now. It's kind of got a
that
banana.
Again could be that whole deodorant.
Oh, okay, that's your new deodorant smell. Okay, fantastic, Tom, who smells like a banana.
Yeah.
And something else fruity in there as well. I mean, it's not an unpleasant smell on the nose at this point. It
Again,
was a
that's
little bit
gross.
sharp out of the it's a little bit sharp out of the can.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't have the bite that it had on the nose.
Yeah.
I just smell sort of like the hop character in it. So it's gotten pretty faint, so it's hard to really give detail behind it. But the flavor still has opened up quite a bit, in my opinion.
We'll give it another go, and then we'll rate it on our 10-point scale.
You know, on a second drink, I get some malt out of that.
Oh, boy. Oh, it's got a pucker factor now.
Does
I had
anybody
not
else
expected
taste
that.
Are you tasting a little bit of malt on the backside now? I am.
Again,
Which surprises me in an IPA.
This is just taking me back to my misspent teenage years where Old English was a fine beer of choice. So now, do you want to review first, or should I review
you
first?
go ahead.
Okay, I can. Okay, so this is not the most offensive thing I've drank.
Nice.
This is also not the best thing. I think the highest I've given on this show so far has been a 4 or a 5, and the lowest that I've given is a 2.
Yeah.
This is kind of feeling like a 3 to me.
3?
It's a 3. It's not terrible. I wouldn't recommend it to people, actually, that I like. Actually, don't think I'd recommend it to people I don't like. But again, this is Fire Eagle American IPA from Austin, Texas. So
you're giving it a 3.
I'm giving it a 3 out of 10.
So this is a West Coast IPA. It has a lot of hop character up front. It's not super balanced with like a citrus flavor on the other side of it. So I really like the citrusy IPAs a lot, but I like West Coast too. But I'm not going to give it the highest score because I like the citrusy ones better. I really
so
like
this one
some
might
of
be
the
down in the ratings then.
I like some of the complexity that's happening on the backside of this now. Like I think it's interesting to taste hop up front and malt on the back. So I always give points for character. So I'm going to give this probably a 6.
A 6. Boy,
Yep.
this one's going to rank low though.
Yeah, I mean, again, if it were a hazy IPA, I'd probably give it like an 8.
I can see that.
But again, it's very drinkable. Like I think you would agree on that. It's just
I would agree. You can drink this.
It's inviting me back. So I might even have a second can. Why not? It's only 7.3%. But no, I think it's a good beer. Does anybody else want to give their? Anybody else have a? Peter, do you have an opinion? What do you think?
I'd give a 7. I like
Hearing a 7 from
7.
the audience. I feel like we're at the Olympics now. We need to have those cards that we hold up for diving.
You gentlemen right back there drinking it. What do you think? What's your opinion?
I'm partial to it. I'm from Austin. They've got a brewery right near me.
Okay.
This is like a 7.5, 8 for me.
Oh, nice.
So we're hearing from a local, repping their local, saying
Yeah.
it's about an 8.
Yeah,
Okay, that
I
checks
feel like
out.
it gets a 1.5 just because you're local. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What about you, gentlemen?
I give it a 5.
5?
Hearing
Yeah.
a 5 from the middle table.
I'm from Dallas, so we have a bunch of local breweries, and I'm partial to the IPAs there, so I'd probably give it a 6.
Yeah. So again, losing a point because you're a Dallas kid, not an Austin person. So yeah, I get it. All right, very good. Well, I hope I can share a beer with you all here shortly. I think it's pretty good.
Yep, but for the main recording now, that's all for today. So if you think you know of a beer that I'll like, or if you have a FedRAMP question, please do drop it in the comments below. And remember to like our LinkedIn and YouTube pages to hear our live interview with information security professionals.